And welcome to the Aviation and Aerospace Community webinar on adopting good practice to protect hearing. We're delighted to welcome this morning Chris Still from the HSE, Principal Noise and Vibration Inspector, and thank him in advance for delivering this webinar. Welcome, Chris. Just before Chris starts his webinar presentation, could we please ask that you put any Q&As for him in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your browser, and if we have time at the end, we'll ask Chris to answer any questions. Over to you, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. I'll just share my screen with you. Put it in this Asian mode. There we go. Thank you very much. So we're going to be talking to you about adopting good practice to protect hearing. This is part of HSE's current inspection programme, and also to really raise awareness about workplace noise. Some of you are probably aware that on HSE's website we've got our statistics on how many people are going deaf in Britain, and you probably see from this that it's relatively low numbers. But the thing to remember about this is people who have got really significant levels of hearing loss, somewhere in the region of about 50 dB. So not just everybody who's got any kind of hearing loss from work, just the ones who are profoundly affected by it, effectively deaf. If we look at the actual numbers and who's been affected, you see that little green dot on the previous slide. That equates to that tiny green box in the bottom corner there. Those are people who can claim industrial disablement benefit. There is a large number of people that are getting workplace noise hearing loss who do not fit into the category of getting some sort of benefit from the government system for their hearing loss. So we know we've got an issue with that. We also understand from looking at the Employers Liability Tracers Office, so this is a group of people who chase up on whether or not somebody can make a civil claim for their hearing loss from work, that 50% of all their ill health claims are coming in for noise. And more recently, when we've been out doing inspections, we've been asking about what kind of health surveillance is provided, and we found that noise was the most prevalent type of health surveillance that was being used across all industries. Older adults with some form of hearing loss were 47% more likely to have symptoms of depression. We've also now seen that hearing loss can be linked to dementia, and that for every 1 dB of hearing loss, the risk of hospitalisation due to workplace injuries rises by 1%, because there's fatigue issues associated with being exposed to noise and people making poor decisions. These are the reasons behind why HSE has been running an inspection programme. It's now been going for about 18 months. We're going to run through on the first phase of it, which we're calling CUF, which will focus in on hearing protection, and that's going to run till April, and then we're going to move into the control phase, and hopefully when we're in that phase, I will start telling you about the types of controls that we're hoping to see and what industries we would be targeting. But just now we're looking at a broad spectrum approach as part of our general health inspection programmes, where we're looking at the bottom of the hierarchy of control because we know a lot of people are relying on it. We are asking about this thing called CUF, and I'll explain what that is to you in a bit. We're also asking people to start thinking about getting a buy quiet scheme in place and having a list of controls that they're working on. And the other thing that we're doing, which we'll report back to you again as we get later on in the year, is that we're gathering third-party workplace noise reports to see how good or how bad the consultancy industry is at giving really good advice to duty holders. So I'm going to talk to you about what HSE's found out about workplace noise. I'm going to tell you what CUF is, and then I'm going to give you some advice on getting good advice. So what are we finding out about workplace noise? In the last 12 months, we went out to about 8,800 duty holders. About 2,500 of them, or 1 in 4, that we visited had a regulatory requirement to ensure hearing protection was worn. Of those people that have got regulatory requirements around about the workplace noise regulations, we were finding that roughly 40% of them were getting some sort of improvement notice. So some of them might just be getting verbal advice and they would be in that 61%, but roughly 40% of the sites we were visiting were either getting a letter or a notice. When we look at the difference between what types of enforcement they're getting, between a period when we weren't doing a workplace health intervention that included noise and when we are doing it. So we've selected 2 3 month periods. We're finding that, yeah, we're starting to see enforcement on hearing protection coming through because that's something that we're focusing on. But we're also seeing an increase in the amount of health surveillance requirements that we're putting on companies because they're not putting it in place. We were hoping to see a reduction in risk assessment. We're not started to focus on control, so we haven't seen an increase in that. But the thing that's not obvious from this graph, because it's normalized to 100%, is that that bottom bar there is 3 times more enforcement than the bar above. We've trebled the amount of enforcement notices that are being issued as a result of this campaign when we're looking at noise. Questions that we ask: were you told how important it is to wear hearing protection all the time? Your workers are on site, and we were finding that a lot of sites weren't doing that. 63% were saying no, they hadn't been checking that. And these are questions that I would say ask yourself these questions, ask your employees these questions to see where you fit in. You know, are you having the same problems? Did you get training on how to wear hearing protection with other PPE? A question that you should be asking your employees or making sure that they've had that. 80% of the sites that we were going to were saying no. Did you get training on how to avoid interference with things like hats and hair and all these sorts of things and glasses? Again, 80% saying no, they hadn't had that information. When we asked employees about how they care for their hearing protection, in all instances, roughly 3/4 of them were saying that they hadn't been told how to store, hadn't been told how to check, and hadn't been told how to report damage. So, you know, information instruction training and supervision are key to making sure that hearing protection works, because it's at the bottom of that hierarchy of control. So it needs constant maintenance, constant supervision of the worker and of your understanding of how well they're using it. One of the things that we look for is, you know, did the duty holder check if hearing protection gave enough protection? So good news here, roughly about 82% of the businesses that we saw were doing some sort of calculation to make sure that they weren't just buying any old earplug, any old earmuff, and hoping that it gave enough attenuation. But on that note, we're not simply looking for high levels of attenuation. We're looking for attenuation that controls risk from noise, but also allows people to hear warning signals. And this one was a bit of a shock to us. Are your employees checking audibility, or are your employers checking audibility when they issue workers with hearing protection? And 95% of the sites that we visited where they were using hearing protection had not done some basic tech check on, can your worker hear the reversing alarm from the forklift truck, the warning alarm on the machine to say that it needs to be switched off. That's quite significant because these are where safety risks lie. And I think if there's one thing that you take away from this, it's maybe to do that simple check. We're not looking for, you know, there's international standards on how to do calculations for this type of thing. But to be perfectly frank, we would be quite happy at this stage if you were simply just getting people to put their hearing protection on and asking them if they could hear the forklift reversing alarm or the audible alarm on a piece of machinery. Types of hearing protection that's being used is roughly split 50/50 between your bog standard earmuffs and your bog standard earplugs. There's a small sliver of that which is other types of hearing protection. What do we mean by other types of hearing protection? Well, we're talking about entertainment earmuffs and plugs, ones that you can listen to the radio through, communication or level dependent headsets, so ones that will cut out the noise when the noise level gets above a certain level. And then we've got things like custom molded plugs, again split quite evenly between plugs and muffs. But we do think that there are advantages to wearing these types of things. Before we started, I was speaking to Joe about, well, what do you provide for people with hearing impairments? And this might be an area where you can find resources that will help you with that. All the sites we visited had at least one site where electronic, that's the ones we just described there, hearing protection was being used. So we're starting to see it becoming relatively widespread use, but just not in large percentages. When we looked at the industries in order of size, with the most workplaces that we visited that were above the upper exposure action value, we were finding that food and drink and rubber and plastics were sort of the top two. Roughly about half the sites, you know, of these types of workplaces had problems with noise. For anybody wondering, you know, plastics also includes packaging manufacturing for a lot of sites, so that I think you can see how those types of things would be a significant issue. Sectors with the highest percentage of sites where no hearing protection was provided, even though noise levels were above the upper exposure action value, we were seeing some issues on waste and recycling. And the service industry, that might be slightly confusing to you because you might assume that HSE doesn't enforce on the types of things you might think of as service industries like call centres. But actually, we were finding that quite a number of we might classify as utilities were coming up under services because that's how the company had registered themselves. So if they were a broadband provider, they thought of themselves as a service industry rather than a company who's involved in digging up the roads to put in, cabling. So we think people need to wear hearing protection. This is something that we absolutely expect. We're seeing enough indications that noise is a problem. We're seeing enough indications in our enforcement that hearing protection needs to be right. And so we've been trying to promote over the last 12 months cuff. And we're using cuff because we want people to think cuff when they look at hearing protection. And the suggestion is if you get it wrong, you get a cuff around the ear. So it's about going and looking at the hearing protection that your employees are wearing or or that you're wearing yourself, and just remembering this mnemonic, which is, first of all, the condition, is the hearing protection in a good state of repair? Everything that you see on this table has been confiscated by an HSE inspector over the years. All of it is in a very, very poor state of repair. Some of it is less obvious than others. The yellow one at the top, the sort of bright yellow one, all the foam inside that earmuff had been picked out. The one that you can see that's got the curly cable coming out of it, the blue one, that is not an electronic hearing protection device. That is somebody who has taken the speaker out of their car and put it in their earmuffs so that they can listen to music. And the ones that are all covered in tape and falling to bits, those are communication devices and hearing protection, but the employer insisted that it was entirely up to the employee to maintain it, and if it started to fall apart, then that was their problem. It's not their problem. So, we're looking for issues with how well the band has or hasn't been stretched. The one on the left there, you want to have the cups kind of close together. You don't want them stretched out as they are in the one in the middle. And we're also going to check things like the seals. Are they in a good state of repair? Always worthwhile to ask the employee to take the earmuffs off. When the person that was wearing these was walking around the factory floor, they look absolutely fine. And it's not until you went into the dining room and asked them to remove them that we found that the seals were all completely burst on these. If you're using helmet mounted hearing protection, we're really not keen on you storing it. At the end of the day, putting it down and having the muffs clamped hard onto the helmet, they'd have a tendency to cause the seals to get divots in them. So the way to store your hat would be with the earmuffs inside the helmet rather than clamped hard against it when they're not in use, and they're put away for the day. We're also interested in use, so condition, use, other workers using the hearing protection when it's needed. Um, I freely admit I was at an airport doing some inspection work, and sticking your fingers in the ear while the aircraft arrives is not the sort of thing that we really want to see. I've tried to cover up who these organisations are to avoid their blushes. But if you're supplying hearing protection, is it handy for the person to use? Do they have it with them? And do they know when they should be using it? If you're not using it all the time it's supposed to be used, so you put it on before the noisy event happens and you take it off after the noisy event is finished. If you're not doing that sort of thing, then the effectiveness of it really is reduced. If you go out and spend money on a hearing protection that gives you a 30 decibel reduction, if you decide that you're only going to wear that for 75% of the time, which still feels like quite a lot, then you're going from a 30 dB reduction down to a 5 dB reduction. So there's pretty significant differences between not wearing it and wearing it, even for short periods of time. We then move on to fit. Does it fit the ear? Is the hearing protection fitted or worn properly? We really don't like to see earmuffs over the top of hats and hoods, or if they're banded earmuffs, if the band's slung round the back of the head in order to get it on over a hat. These types of things are not really acceptable, nor is the earplug sticking out of the ear. Really, when you're wearing earplugs, it should be properly inserted and you follow the instructions that the manufacturer gives. This is a constant issue for us in HSE. Very rarely do we see people inserting them correctly, pulling the ear up and back in order to try and straighten out the ear canal and making sure that that earmuff is rolled down to as small as earplug is rolled down to as small a size as possible so it can be fitted correctly. These are the ones that I tend to wear because I'm on and off site quite a lot, but they need to be pushed in well, and those little caps need to be replaced quite frequently. We're then looking at fit. Is it fit for purpose? So that's the last F in our cuff acronym. And we're really looking at, has the hearing protection been correctly specified? Now, for HSE, we've got a simple rule of thumb table, which, if you've got a piece of machinery and the manufacturer or your measurements say that that piece of machinery is 90 to 95 dB, then you should be looking for an earmuff or an earplug that's got an SNR of 20 to 30. And for smaller companies, we would be quite accepting of that if that's the sort of work that they've done. If we went into a small workshop with 2 or 3 people and the employer said, well, look, I've got one piece of machinery, it produces 95 to 100 decibels because it says that in the information that I've got for it. So I went and specified earmuffs or earplugs at SNR 25 to 35, we would accept that. If you're running a larger company, however, you probably need to be a bit more involved in what you're doing, and that's why we have calculators on our website. Anybody can use them, whether you're running a small workshop or you're running a multinational business, and we would expect to see that type of thing, that what the noise levels are that you're exposing them to, and you're providing hearing protection that controls it. And the benefit of our calculators are that they will tell you if you're overprotecting. So remember that 95% of sites where they weren't checking to see if audible warning alarms could be heard. That's really what this thing is trying to help you understand. So who or what did duty holders use to do their sums for the hearing protection? We're finding that 40%, or round about 40% of sites were getting some sort of third-party advice to help them with their understanding of hearing protection and also control and risk assessment. So we want to be sure that they're getting good quality advice. Around half of transport and metal fabrication companies, so that probably covers aviation and quite a fair portion of the aerospace manufacturing divisions. You are using some sort of third-party advisor to help you with the work that you're doing. So what about getting advice on good advice? What are we looking at? Well, I'm going to start by telling you a story about a company who we were looking at for advice on workplace noise. This is an inspector that came to me and said, look, I've been out to site, I've seen this company, they're using compressed air guns in their production process, causing daily exposures so loud that we have to shout. So that's our shout test. And so they don't know what their exposures are. They couldn't tell us what type of hearing protection they were to use. They weren't using hearing protection, but it was very noisy. They decided that they needed to get a knock. That was what was issued by the inspector. And they said, look, you need to control that risk. You need to do something about that noise risk and reduce it. And roughly the cost of a notice letter is about £750. So that's the starting cost of us having to deal with this, or for that company having to deal with this issue. That's really the process that we expect them to run through. There should be a risk assessment. The risk assessment should inform the controls. Part of our controls are going to be about maintenance, hearing protection and training. Health surveillance is there as a backstop to tell you if any of that isn't working, because if ill health comes out of the health surveillance, the idea is that you go back to the start, reassess the risk, reassess the controls, reassess what you're doing in order to reduce the risk of hearing loss. So we've got a company, we've told them you need to do something about it. They go out, they get a workplace noise report, they pay £1,500 for that report, so not the cheapest thing in the world, and they get told that they're using compressed air guns and they're not sure just how noisy it is because it was very poor consultancy. I think they didn't really have any meaningful noise measurements to help them with it or actually tell them what to do on control. So our inspector says, well, you still need to control that. We're still waiting for you to show us that you've complied with this notice. They go out, they get another consultant, they spend another £2,500. So we're now up to a £4,000 bill on consultancy. And that consultant is better, but not that much better. And they tell them that their noise exposure is 89 dB, but there's no other advice, no other information that's produced for the duty holder. Now, whether they were expecting more advice beyond just a number, I don't know. I suspect that they were expecting a lot more advice and a lot more of information based on the conversations that I had with them. But they're now in a position where, yes, we know exactly down to the decibel level what our problem is, but we already knew that when we went in and they had the shout test and found out that there was a problem. And so our inspector says, well, look, you're still going to have to comply with this notice. What are you going to do? You know, we're in a position now where we've spent around about £4,000 on consultancy. We've got a hearing protection bill that's going to come in at about £1,300 every year, probably another £500 a year on training, £450 a year on health surveillance. And my expectation is, because we're not really doing anything to get rid of that noise source, and we're probably not going to be able to manage our hearing protection because of all the issues we've seen with the cough thing, that they're probably going to get hit with a bill of about £27,000 for compensation payments for third-party ill health. Remember, 50% of all the claims coming in are for hearing, so it's not that unlikely. What's the solution to this? What's the deal with this? That is the solution for compressed air on nozzles. It is a low noise air nozzle. It will save you money. It will get the noise level down. It is something that we have been telling people to use for ages. We told this duty holder to use it. The conversation that I had with them went along the lines of, look, buy these things and see if they work. They're going to cost you £260. And the noise level went down from 89 decibels to 65, because in that situation, it was the main or only real noise problem that they had. So they've went and spent, they're spending this kind of money. Really, they should be doing something which we've been telling people since 1985. It's not a secret that these things are working. It's not a secret that HSE expects to see these types of things. And really, we should only be looking at a cost of about £250, £260 to deal with that, because we will eliminate the noise problem, and so the need for risk assessment and maintenance and health surveillance disappears. So that's the difference between getting good advice and bad advice, and paying quite a lot of money for little more than just noise measurements. So getting advisors to say what the regulations and the guidance say is really what we're trying to do. And so how can you help yourself and how can you help others achieve that? Well, if you are in the position of trying to get somebody in to help you with a workplace noise problem, I would advise you to go to this web address, download this document from the Hearing Conservation Association, and ask the consultants that are tendering for the work to help you with your noise problem to answer these questions. If they can answer yes to all the green questions and most of the amber questions, then they're probably somebody who can really help you with your noise problem. If, however, you're the person who is providing the workplace noise advice, if you're doing the consultancy work for a company, then I would advise you to go and have a look at this website, the British Occupational Hygiene Society, download their noise survey template and use that and compare it against the types of reports that you're issuing. And one of the key things that you want to figure out for yourself, if you are providing noise consultancy advice, is, are you providing a base level report, an intermediate report, or a comprehensive report? Because my experience is that there's a lot of consultants who are paid a very low rate of money and asked only to provide noise measurements. However, when we turn up as HSE inspectors, the duty holder will tell us that the noise measurement report that they asked for is actually the all singing, all dancing comprehensive report, and suggest that if there's anything wrong, it's because the consultant did something wrong. One caveat to this that's probably worth being aware of is, if you're the duty holder and if you want to do this type of work yourself, that's fine. If you think you've got competent people who can do it, that is not a problem. And we're not looking for that type of report from duty holders. We're looking for this type of report from third-party consultants. That is because I would fully expect a duty holder that's doing their own assessment of noise to have this kind of information spread across a number of documents and held by a variety of different people. But if you've paid someone to come in and do a survey for you, you should have an understanding. Are they just going to tell you the basic information, who's above the action value, who needs health surveillance, who needs hearing protection, where do my hearing protection zones go, what type of hearing protection do I need? Or are you going to get something that's a bit more involved and give you specific control advice for the noise problems you've got on your site? So the last thing we're going to touch on again is this 95% of people not checking the audibility of workers when you've got hearing protection on and there's things moving around. This is the aviation and aerospace group for IOSH, and my experience, and I suspect your experience, is that there's a lot of people working on the apron that are moving around, and there's a lot of vehicles moving around, and some of those people are wearing hearing protection. And the question I would ask you is, how confident are you that they can hear a reversing alarm from a vehicle? How confident are you that they can hear warning signals, or they know when something's started up or shouldn't be started up? If you go away from this talk today wanting to check something, that would be something to check, because 95% of people that we've spoken to are getting it wrong. If you're not in that 95%, then that's fantastic. But if you are, it should be something that you can look at really quickly and get a handle on. So we're going to finish up there. Just to say that I've talked to you about what HSE's found out about workplace noise. What we're finding is that we're still seeing significant issues and significant levels of enforcement for noise, and it is clustered around certain sectors. What's cuff? Well, cuff is about how good the hearing protection is, and you go back to work today or the next time you're looking at a set of earmuffs or earplugs, ask yourself, is it in good condition? Are the people using it all the time they should be, or are you using it all the time you should be? Does it fit? Do you understand how to fit that properly? It's not been interfered with. And do you know that the numbers on it comply or are suitable for the noise levels you're exposed to? And that also fits into that, can you hear those audible warning signals? And the last thing was about getting advice on getting good advice. If you're going to get somebody in, then please have a look at the Hearing Conservation Association's guidance document that helps you ask questions for a consultant. That document was put together by members of IOSH, the Association of Noise Consultants, British Occupational Hygiene Society, and the Institute of Acoustics. So it's people from your own industries who've helped put that together. And then the final thing is, if you are the person who's given that advice, then please have a look at that template report that the BOHS produces, because it's the sort of thing that we would say we would be happy with those types of reports. Probably the one thing to understand is I'm not that fussed if it doesn't follow it to the letter. All I'm interested in is, are you hitting the key points? So if your reports don't look exactly the same, but you're managing to hit all the key points that are in the BOHS guidance, then you're probably doing the right thing. Right, so I usually finish up by putting a slide with my name and my email address and my LinkedIn contact details, because, well, why not? It's free advertising space, and I would encourage anybody that wants to get in contact with me to please feel free to speak to me. I can't promise I'll always get back to people quickly. I'm still trying to clear off my emails from the last time I was off on holiday, but please feel free to contact me if you want to ask me any questions about workplace noise or hand arm vibration. Because I'm very conscious that people never want to speak to HSE inspectors about their problems on seminars or webinars, because they're worried that I'm going to say something to them that might involve enforcement. But I promise you that's not going to happen today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris, so much for the information that you've provided. We do have a couple of questions. There's one from James. Will the slides be shared? Are you happy to share the slides with the
Yeah,
delegates
I
that
think I think
have attended?
I believe that they're being shared, and they'll go up on your YouTube channel. Is that correct? I think.
Okay. We've got a very, very long question from Rob, so it might be worth, Rob, if you contact. I don't know if you can see the question, Chris. Actually, if you go to Q&A, can you see
Oh
the question
goodness.
from Rob? It's regarding working in the helicopter medical service
All right.
area and noise protection.
Staff using basic earplugs with equipment. Equip the crews with active noise reduction when flying, and molded plugs are provision is based on noise data sheets. We carry passenger patients and noise exposures. Um, yes, I think I've seen this before actually. We carry headsets providing protection for our patients. Um, I don't know is the short answer, Rob. I'd need to have a look at it. I think you probably need to get somebody to have a look at it for you as well. Your key sort of issue here is what are they exposed to, and for how long are they going to be in the aircraft for that length of time? And then also, can you communicate with them? I suspect it's probably really important that if they are awake, you can communicate with them. But the other thing to remember as well is that are they, if these are people who are not typically exposed to noise on their typical day to day, there is an option to average over the course of a week. So whilst you might be exposing them to high levels of noise for maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes of a flight, then you also have to be aware of the fact that they're probably not going to be exposed to noise for the rest of their life, hopefully, at that level, or certainly in that scenario. So I think maybe I'd be looking at averaging that over the course of a week to see whether that's going to be an issue for you, on the assumption that they're probably not going to be exposed to noise for the rest of the time. We're looking, I mean, it's not really written down anywhere, but the thing that I'm kind of interested in is regular and frequent exposure to noise. That this is something that's happening a lot. If the noise levels, however, are so high, particularly with peak noise levels, that you might get instantaneous hearing loss, then that might be an issue. But I don't think that would be a problem with helicopters. But I'm not the best person for helicopters. My colleague Rachel or Andrew are a bit better on those lines.
Um, Abdullah, you've said, let me understand SNR, but
Yeah.
can you be a bit more specific?
Yeah, so I think he's probably just asking what it is. So SNR is a single number rating. It's specific. If you're involved in the supply of hearing protection in the US, they use different numbers in the UK and certainly in other parts of Europe we tend to use SNR. It's just how much the earplug or the earmuff will reduce noise. It doesn't take into account frequency. There's another method called the HML method, which is whether it's high frequency, medium frequency, or low frequency noise. Maybe the best thing to do would be to go and have a look on the HSE's website at the calculators, because it will let you a bit of a play about with that, would let you see how it works. You should be able to find SNR data on pretty much every hearing protection manufacturer's website or on the side of the box. So the idea would be that you understand what the noise level is from your piece of equipment, and it isn't the average noise level. It's not like the daily exposure level is 87 decibels, because I spend 20 minutes next to a machine which is 95 dB and the rest of the time somewhere else. Uh, it's If you've got a piece of machinery that says this is 95 dB from this piece of machinery, you would then take that number and look at how that works with the SNR. You'd also need to have the C-weighted measurements as well in order to use the calculator, which is a slightly different one from the average A-weighted noise level. And that's really where you need to start getting advice and assistance, either from the manufacturer of the machinery, the supplier of the hearing protection, or a third-party provider.
There's a question from Rebecca. What are the best tools to use for measuring noise exposure? Are on-site handheld devices reliable?
So the expectation that we have is that you're using either a class 1 or a type 1 sound level meter, or a class 2 or a type 2 sound level meter. Just so you know, there's the difference between class and type there isn't really a difference. It's just that they've changed the terminology over the years. So I can never remember which way round it is, but basically one means it's a bit older than the other. But these are things that you would expect to ask. So if you're going to a supplier of noise measurement equipment, you should be asking for a class 1 or type 1 or a class 2 or type 2 sound level meter. If you're measuring it yourself, we've got information in our guidance document L108 about how to do the measurements. There's also ISO standards for it as well. But really what you maybe want to look for is something that is described as an integrating sound level meter. So something that is capable of averaging the measurements. A lot of the cheaper stuff that you'll see, the sort of middle aisle Aldi type thing, or the things that you get on Amazon, will simply give you instantaneous noise levels for, so when you're standing there, you'll notice that the number's constantly changing. What you want is something that will average those noise levels. The last thing that you're looking for is that it can also measure peak sound, so instantaneous high levels of noise. That's probably less of an issue for you if you're not working with those types of noises. And where you'll see that would be if you're working with firearms, or you're working in places where they're using punch presses, that type of thing. So I would say I tend to avoid using things that are that are available on online websites like Amazon, because they tend not to be aimed at doing workplace noise assessments. You're going to have to go to a kind of reputable noise and vibration manufacturer, the sort of the Brulin Cares, Ryons, Castle, Casella, these types of companies. There's also an option as well for dose badges, and these can be type 2. They will average the noise exposure, and the newer ones that are now available. I think that the issue with dose badges in the past that people, well, consultants didn't like, was that in order to get the full day, you had to turn up at 7 in the morning before everybody was there, and then come back at 5 o'clock at night to collect them all in when everybody had left. Whereas now the dose badges, now you can set them to collect data over a number of days, and they will automatically start and stop for the work period. And actually, there are a lot of companies as well that will hire you noise equipment. So if you wanted to hire dose badges, you could do that if you wanted to use them to get an indication of what your exposures are. We're not massively keen on people using their mobile phones, because we found that when you update the which you get a lot. They ask you for an update of the software, that sometimes that can change the sensitivity of the microphone. What mobile phones can be useful for, though, and cheaper sound level meters can be really useful for as well, is to see whether controls that you're putting in place have made a difference. So if you haven't updated the phone, and you wanted to measure what the noise level was from a piece of machinery or a piece of equipment, and then you've done something to control that noise, that difference should be relatively credible. But you need, I'd say, be cautious about what type of equipment that you're using.
Thank you. An anonymous attendee. If alarms alerts can it be hard when hearing protection? If alarms alerts cannot be heard when using hearing protection, what other solutions aside from using alternative PPE and with lower NRR?
So if alarms, and say that again, if I'm trying to, sorry, could you just repeat that again? If alarms and alerts cannot be heard when wearing hearing protection, what other solutions
Solutions
aside from
aside from
using?
using alternate PPE with lower NRR.
Yeah, so there is an expectation that you should be able to hear that. If you can't hear it, then you would be looking for, a visual indication. So maybe a light that comes on. The key thing is understanding of what that alarm means. We've also got situations where people may have someone who's got, significant hearing loss, and so everybody knows that even if they weren't wearing hearing protection, even if it wasn't that noisy, that person couldn't hear that alarm. So if it's an evacuation alarm or a leak alarm, that they have a system in place where somebody is required to go and collect that person or make them aware of that. We've also seen for reversing alarms and that type of thing where people are fitted with vibrating badges. So when they come into proximity of something that's reversing, that vibration happens on them. Similarly, actually, the kind of fundamental thing when it comes to people in vehicles is to try and separate them out, and that's what we would look for first of all. But some sort of other sensory warning that can be linked into that alarm, whether it's a vibrating button or pad, or whether it's a light that flashes that comes on, so that people know that that's the sort of thing that they've got an issue with.
Great, thank you. From George, the guidance suggests the health surveillance is required when exposed above the UEAV on a regular and frequent basis.
Mm.
What is considered regular and frequent?
Yeah, so say that we don't really have this written down, other than in our enforcement guidance, which I don't think is currently available. But if you read the regulations in terms of exposure, it doesn't really make that kind of exception of regular and frequent. But we are looking for people that are, at least a couple of days a week where they're exposed to these types of noise levels. I think for noise it's slightly simpler because we talk about averaging for weekly averaging, and so we would allow weekly averaging where there's maybe one or two instances where you go above the upper exposure action value, but for the rest of the week there's no exposure, and so that's the sort of thing we're looking for. But as a rough rule of thumb, when it comes to noise and vibration, I'm looking for at least a couple of days a week where they're being exposed above these sort of issues. The higher the noise level and the higher the risk, then the more I would sort of say, well, look, yeah, okay, maybe you're only doing this once a week, but it's very noisy and it's for a long period of time. A sort of classic example would be you've got people that are doing maintenance tasks, but then once a month they've got to clear out. It used to be foundry kilns. The rest of the week, an entire month would go by without there being a noise issue. But then they have this incredibly high noise, high vibration task, and those risks would be something that would make me think you probably should have the health surveillance. So yeah, apologies, a bit of a woolly answer, but it is a bit of a woolly area.
Do you have any suggestions for hearing protection when staff are using head coverings, headscarves, turbans, etc.? I presume there's no exemption from the requirement to use hearing protection for this
Yes. And I think this is
workforce.
another thing because, one of the things that you always say, check cuff, check the condition and the use. And if you're wearing it under a headscarf, how can people see that you're wearing it? And actually, weirdly, we have this sort of issue with earplugs as well, that we've come across people who aren't wearing it correctly because when they do wear it correctly, it can't be seen and their managers think that they're not wearing it. Um, there's an expectation in the regulations that you provide a selection of hearing protection and that you try to get something that works for the person, for the individual. And there's also an expectation that employees should be involved in the decision-making process behind which hearing protection is provided. So, if you've got issues with fit, and because you're wearing, other headgear or whatever it happens to be, there should be alternatives provided, and there should be an understanding amongst the company that these things are dealt with. Um, I have seen things like balaclavas with ear holes in them that allow you to wear hearing protection and a mesh over them and these sorts of things, but that's usually for sort of cold weather working. But I think that the thing that you probably want to do is sort of remind the employer or remind the whoever it is that's making the purchasing choices on hearing protection that there should be alternatives available that allow somebody who is wearing a hat or glasses or whatever it happens to be, that the alternatives are there and available for them. I think I said earlier on that I like to use the banded um, lugs because they're simple to remove and place back on, and that works for me. I can't use earplugs because I can only get them in one ear, and that's been my experience. So,
Great, thank you. Samantha's posted a question. Have there been any fines for overprotecting workers?
have there been any fines? So I suppose yeah, I mean, we don't theoretically we don't fine people for HSE doesn't fine people. It's the courts that fine them. So the question you're probably asking is anybody been taken to court for overprotection? Uh, what typically happens, and it's quite a sad thing that happens, is that people tend to get killed with these types of things. And I've been in HSE for 10 years, and I would say I'm averaging about one fatality expert witness report every 2 years. So every 2 years, there'll be a court case taken against somebody who has been killed or crushed or run over at work. And part of that reasoning for it, part of it, because it is usually there are other things that have went wrong for that to happen. Part of that has been that somebody has maybe wearing hearing protection and didn't hear the vehicle approaching, didn't hear the machine switching on, that sort of thing, or didn't hear instructions correctly and switched the machine on when they shouldn't. So they go to court. People get fined for that, but they won't show up as you're getting taken to court because you overprotected. What they show up as is you're getting taken to court because an employee has been killed for a number of reasons. One of which is that they couldn't hear what was happening.
Okay. Manesh has asked, is it necessary for a noise policy to include how learnings from safety event investigations are implemented, even if no noise-related safety events have occurred and all required controls are currently in place? The reason being, an auditor raised this point during a recent audit, and Manesh would appreciate your guidance on clarification.
So is it necessary for a noise policy to include And it's a safety investigations. Yeah, I mean I think I come back to the sort of basic principles, the sort of plan, do, check, act thing that there is an expectation that there's supposed to be this continual understanding and learning. Um, Yes, we put out safety alerts. We tell people that there's an issue. One of the things that it says within our regulations and guidance about risk assessment is that you should introduce all reasonably practicable controls. And we also talk about when you would reassess your risk. And the reasons for reassessing risk would be, have you changed the environment? So the noise levels might be different. They might have gone up or gone down. Uh, are you implementing controls that are reasonably practicable, i.e., this product that used to cost £1 million now only costs £5, so why aren't you using it? And then the third one in there, which I think touches on the point that's probably been made at the safety audit, is that if things become available, if information becomes available that says this is now a risk, that you should be updating that. So it comes back to well, again, this a lot of this is my understanding of it. It comes back to reasonable, what's reasonably practical. If everybody in your industry knows that this is a thing and you should be doing it, then the argument against not doing it becomes much, much weaker. So,
Ooh,
but yes, I think it's the sort of thing that we would expect to see that people are updating their risk assessments when reasonably practical controls would suggest that they do so, or when information suggests that the risk has changed.
thank you. Angela's asked if you can put the link in for the calculator, please, for the, I think you just go
Yes.
in the HSC and put in the words and it should be there. We'll try and do that for you, Angela. Are dosimeter badges the tools to capture daily exposure for staff? Sorry, just moved up the page. Using multiple tool types and differing environments. I know we need to capture
Yeah,
across the full
so
days.
uh, HSE doesn't have an issue with people using dosimetry and dose badges. That's really where they tend to shine is when you do have people doing a lot of different work. People that work in a very fixed environment with a steady level of noise, you could probably figure out what their noise exposure are with short-term measurements. If they're using a lot of multiple tools, then the dose badges can be more effective. The thing that you want to be watching out for is don't try not to rely on just one dose badge measurement because if you just give one dose badge to one person, there's no guarantee that they won't play funny buggers with it and place it down on a high noise surface for 4 hours or just not wear it. So you tend to find with dose badges that they'll come on a base station with maybe 5 or 6 other badges, and so it's worthwhile badging up a group of people that are all doing the same type of task and using those numbers to give you an indication of what their typical exposures are. So if you've got, half a dozen people doing horticultural work, they're not all going to be using the lawnmower or the strimmer at the same time. They're not all going to be using it for the same duration of time. And what you could do there is say, well, we've got 5 people, we've badged them up over a number of days, and their typical exposure is this. I think that the thing that you maybe want to be aware of is, people get very into and very concerned about what the number is. And yes, we absolutely want to know whether or not you're typically going to be above the action values because that will dictate whether health surveillance is needed. But HSE isn't obsessed about the numbers. What we're obsessed about is, can you quickly establish whether or not there is a risk and whether those risks put you above the action values. And once you've established that, moving on to and putting your focus into control measures and information, instruction and training and supervision for your staff. No matter how good your noise measurements are, we will always ask you, what are you going to do about that noise problem? I touched briefly, and I didn't really put it in this presentation about the shout test. That is in our guidance document. It's this thing, if somebody's working in an environment where they have to shout at 2 meters to be heard, and they're likely to be in there for most of their working day, that is an indication to us that that is a risk. And I have been to sites where that is what the duty holder has done. Very small workshop. They did the shout test. They got some information on the noise levels from their equipment. They got some information on suitable hearing protection to deal with that. They went and got health surveillance and they got a A4 sheet of paper and wrote down what controls that they were going to put in place. And there's not really a lot that you would say is wrong with that. So, don't, it's good to get good measurements, and if we want you to do it correctly. But remember that the key focus here is to get people to move on to looking at control and trying to eliminate that.
Mohammed's put a question here. Could you please advise on the levels of noise exposure that would necessitate relocation or additional control measures? Specifically, at what noise levels should unit or office be relocated to are with low noise exposure?
So, well, first thing, if you're talking specifically, I think it's in this case where you've got it's a unit or an office that shouldn't be exposed to noise. The first question I'd be asking is that um, a, a rest facility or a place where people go to have their lunch. In that instance, we would expect that to not be an environment that is exposed to levels of noise, and so it should be moved. That people, when they are at rest, when they're they shouldn't be exposed to levels of workplace noise that could be harmful. If it's an office, well, you're kind of starting to stray into more environmental and noise disturbance issues. And I would, again, for me, and I think the last time we had a conversation with the aviation people, there was questions about when we open the window, we can hear the aircraft noise from the airport, and at what point is it a health risk? Well, for me, as HSE, it's a health risk when it gets above the lower exposure action value, and that something should be done at that stage. But levels below that, you're talking more about nuisance and disturbance, and there's some pretty, abundant information on what is good environments for people to work in and make sure that they're doing their job competently and such like. Um, at what point, coming back to his first point, which is at what point is our noise levels exposures where there's a necessity to relocate or apply additional control measures? In the UK, it's a LARP. In theory, we would expect people to be trying to control noise to as low as reasonably practical. So the compressed air option that I showed you, that got the noise level down to 68, so well below the action value. But because it gets it down to that level, that wouldn't stop me from asking for it. So if there's something that you can do that would reduce exposure from above an action value to below it, I'm not really that too bothered as to how far below it you get. The lower you get, the better. But there isn't a hard and fast rule on that. It is a LARP. It is as low as reasonably practical as what can you achieve. You still there, Joe?
Sorry, I put myself on mute. An interesting question from Kevin. Hello, my Apple Watch can measure noise and sends a warning when the noise level exceeds 85 decibels. I work in the leisure sector. They do provide hearing protection when backwashing swimming pools. My company only uses a handheld noise meter. As you know, it always comes down to cost and getting the correct professional noise RA.
Yeah. I mean, doesn't sound great. What's going on there? I think you're suggesting that. I mean, the Apple Watch. I did question how accurate that is, and I'm not saying that it can't be accurate. It's just it's not the sort of thing that we would accept for workplace noise measurements. But it may be indicative of what the issue you've got. You've also mentioned that you've got a particular task there, which might be a noise problem. I don't think we tend not to enforce on swimming pools, but you can raise concerns with HSE. If you go into the HSE website, you can raise a concern. It's called the concerns page. If you type HSE concerns, and you can put that in. So if you've got a problem, a specific problem, and you want it to be inspected on or looked at, or the company to be asked about, then that's the way to do it. Please make sure it's the concerns page, not the complaints page. That's where you go to complain about how bad I am. The concerns page is about how bad somebody outside the HSE is. What would tend to happen in that situation is, given it's a swimming pool, I would assume that it might go to the local authority, unless the swimming pool is operated by the local authority, in which case it is HSE that enforce on it. But the concerns team will triage that and send it to the relevant regulator, whoever it happens to be. And they will then make a decision as to whether or not they will come out and investigate. Sometimes that investigation is a phone call and a question about what they're up to, and other times it will can result in an inspector turning up to do an inspection.
And one final quick question for Nazrat. Isn't there a health problem with regular use of earplugs where it traps the earwax and leads to repeated ear irrigation because of work? If so, does the HSE address this problem?
I know people do have issues with wearing earplugs, and they can have problems with earwax build up and compacted earwax and that sort of thing. But again, that is where this expectation of what are you supplying and do you have alternatives that allow people to wear things that are comfortable, that are not causing other health issues, etc. So yes, that is the way that we address it. The way that it's addressed is through those regulatory and guidance requirements that say you're supposed to involve the employees with this. And so if someone is coming along with infections in the ear and they think it's because of the earplug usage, then they should be looking at an alternative hearing protection for them. Also, there's probably a little bit of expectation here on the employee as well. You know, there's an expectation that they should be using it, and there's an expectation that they should be reporting back when there's problems with using it. So that is a regulatory requirement under Section 8, I think it is. And also, I think information instruction and training as well on the use of hearing protection is quite key. One of the things that you saw there was the sort of use or non-use of hearing protection in the waste and recycling industry. We see a lot of use of earplugs there, and you would think to yourself, is that the best option if your hands are possibly going to be dirty or you're having to wear gloves all the time? You know, because if you're constantly putting things in and out your ears with dirty hands, then you might be exacerbating the risks.
Okay, thanks ever so much, Chris, for your time this morning. It's much appreciated. Thank you for answering all the questions. And thank you to all our members for attending the webinar this morning. Thanks very much. Good day.